The U.S. Senate has overwhelmingly approved President Obama's nomination of John Kerry as the next Secretary of State. The 69-year-old Democrat will succeed Hillary Clinton, taking over Washington's diplomacy amid deepening turmoil in the Mideast, raging conflicts in Africa, and complicated relations with Russia. RT's Ganecha Jacan looks at Kerry's past foreign policy decisions and what it might signal about the future.
The evolution of John Kerry's views has been quite remarkable. So remarkable that it's hard to pin where exactly he's standing on a number of issues. He built his career on the reputation of an anti-war advocate. A Vietnam veteran himself, he was very vocal as a spokesman of the Vietnam veterans against the war back in the 70s. Then in the 80s, he challenged the Reagan administration's policies on Central America. In 1991, he voted against the U.S. involvement in the first Gulf War. But later, over the years, John Kerry has morphed into a pretty much mainstream politician with a record which casts a shadow on the anti-war image that he's been trying to build for himself. In 2002, he voted to authorize the Iraq invasion. And since then, he has made a slew of conflicting statements, which might have cost him the election in 2004 when he was running as the anti-war candidate. So while criticizing George W. Bush for the war in Iraq, in 2004, in August of that year, when asked if he would still have gone to war knowing Saddam Hussein did not possess weapons of mass destruction, John Kerry said, yes, I would have voted for the authority. I believe it was the right authority for a president to have. In September that year, in direct contradiction to that statement, John Kerry said, we should not have gone to war knowing the information that we know today. These are just some of his other conflicting statements. For example, on supplemental funding for the troops back in 2003, it was an $87 billion bill. In September that year, he was for it. In October, he voted against it. It was at that time when he said, I actually did vote for it before I voted against it, a phrase which kind of stuck with John Kerry. On Patriot Act, again, he was for it before he was against it. On Israel's unilateral construction of a security fence, he called it a barrier to peace at one time, but less than a year later, he reversed himself, calling the fence a legitimate act of self-defense. Now, as far as his present views, which he shared during his confirmation hearing last week, on Iran, he said, although the U.S. favors diplomacy, but Washington will act to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Whether the preventive action could mean war, he did not clarify. He was cautious speaking about Syria, and that caution is reflective of the White House becoming seemingly more aware of the challenges there and the threats behind a military intervention. But it's worth noting that in May, asked if there were any conditions under which he would support U.S. or NATO-led airstrikes on the Syrian military, John Kerry said, quote unquote, sure. But before that, in March, he also said bombing Syria would not be the right thing to do. It's not necessarily a flip-flop, but you can see that his actions and views can go either way. During the confirmation hearing, we heard John Kerry pretty much channel a new message that the Obama administration is trying to convey, and that is, in President Obama's own words, we're not shooting from the hip, and his nomination of Chuck Hagel, who's known to have been against the strike on Iran, for example, could be part of that message. So Secretary of State John Kerry now channels that we're not going to rush into action message. But his record shows that when the tide turns, and that tide can turn very quickly, and the drums of war start beating loud and clear again, John Kerry would probably jump on that tide.
Well, we spoke to Brian Drolet, director of an independent media outlet, Deep Dish TV, who shared his view on how Kerry's appointment is likely to affect key international issues.
If you look at American policy in the last 20 years even, but in the last since Bush and Obama, what has really changed? First strike wars in Afghanistan and Yemen and Pakistan, and now they're positioning so-called missiles defense on the Turkish-Russian border, which is essentially a first strike weapon. Targeted assassinations intensified under Obama and his assertion of his right to order the killing of American citizens anywhere in the world. Is Kerry going to stand up in international forums and say, no, that's wrong, we can't do that? I don't think so. Neither did Hillary Clinton.